Well, joining me now is the Australian newspaper's Washington correspondent, Adam Creighton. Adam, big news out of Georgia this week. The judge in Donald Trump's election interference trial has dismissed 3 of the criminal counts against the former U.S. president. Tell us what these charges were about, and is there a chance more charges in this case are going to fall by the wayside?
Well, just on the first question, I think it was a surprise that some of these somewhat obscure and vague charges were dropped. This, of course, is the racketeering case, the case largely against Donald Trump, and of course, I think some 18 so-called co-conspirators who allegedly tried to get the Georgia government to overturn the vote in 2020 in that state. Many legal analysts, of course, have different views, but I think the objectively fair view that this is a rather trumped-up case, if you like, and it's basically trying to get Trump. It was a shock that some of the charges were dropped. I'm starting to think that maybe the judge, Scott McAfee, who made this decision, I think he may have done this perhaps to butter up the Trump side of the equation, because of course in coming days, as we know, he's got to make the much more important decision on whether to dump Fani Willis, who is the district prosecutor for that case. And it may well be that if he does dump her, which I think is unlikely, but if he does, the whole case may fall apart. So, I mean, all of the charges would be dropped then, because it may well be that no other district attorney in the state of Georgia wants to take up what is, of course, an extremely controversial case.
Yeah, and this is the issue with Fani Willis and the prosecutor who was also her secret boyfriend that she was paying state money to run the case. And it all, this creates a big sort of idea that there's a lot of political interference in this, as there is in New York, where the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has now said that they're willing to delay Trump's hush money trial for another 30 days, according to a court filing. Now, this hush money case that was scheduled to start on March 25th. Pushing this back, does this have implications for the November election?
Well, look, it probably does, in the sense that, I mean, you have to laugh a bit. I mean, in the space of 3 months, it seems most of the serious cases against Donald Trump, and of course there's the 4 indictments, and the hush money case is one of those indictments, but they're all being pushed, constantly being pushed into the future. It seems more and more likely that most of them are going to be after the 2024 election. I mean, this one, of course, won't be, but it's just amusing that even that, which of course was meant to be set in stone, for the 25th of March, is even going to be pushed forward by 30 days. And of course, it's worth pointing out too that particular case, which is the only one of the 4 that is scheduled so far, is the case that I would say is the most politically helpful to Donald Trump of all. That was the first indictment, I believe, that was issued last year, and of course, after it was issued, his polling soared. So I mean, he's probably not too, so he'd be pleased with the delay, of course. But I mean, if any of the 4 cases gets to go ahead, I think he'd want it to be this one.
Yeah, indeed. Now, I want to move on then now to Trump's position in the election here, because one of the big issues here that we're seeing play out is always, of course, the economy. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Inflation is still apparently a killer for a lot of Americans. New data released this week showed inflation edging up again to 3.2% in February. Yet here's what Joe Biden had to say.
Wages are rising faster than prices, and now we have among the lowest inflation rates of any country in America, and we're still fighting to lower it even further.
The lowest inflation rate of any country in America. Adam, this is putting aside the president's word salad there, this would suggest that there's a big issue politically for the president if he cannot say that prices are coming down for Americans.
Yes. Yeah, well, it certainly is. And, of course, there's no chance that he'll ever be able to say that prices are actually coming down. I mean, inflation is still very much positive. It's 3.2%, as you said, over the year to February. And a few years ago, that would have been considered a massive rate of inflation. I mean, it's not low, 3.2% every year. I mean, if you add that up over 5 years, that's an enormous amount of inflation. So, so ordinary Americans are feeling it. And, I noticed there the president said that wages are rising faster than inflation. Well, maybe for some people, but certainly not for most people. I think he's wrong there with the statistics. And it's probably the case that the people who are getting... Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, because I thought there was a really interesting little cultural marker about this here. The New York Times, which of course is read by, a higher income elite group of people in America, they published this week a collection of 100 cheap dinners for inflation-heavy times. That's how they build it. So clearly this would be something that's affecting people, at all ends of the economic spectrum now in America.
Yes, but I mean, it certainly affects the poorer people the most, obviously, because they're far more attuned to the cost of things at the supermarket, than wealthy people, than the sorts of people that read the New York Times, and even civil servants. Anyone who works for the federal or state government tends to get an indexation in their pay, which is linked to inflation. So, so the people that really suffer are the low-income workers in the private sector who don't get indexation, and for whom inflation just makes them poorer and poorer. And also those people, they tend to have savings in the bank in the form of bank deposits. And of course, every time inflation goes up, the value of those deposits declines. So, I mean, inflation really is an insidious beast for, for a very large share of the US population.
And is this cutting the chances that Janet Yellen and the Fed are going to cut rates later this year, as people had been kind of talking up as something that might give the economy a boost heading into the election?
Yeah, look, probably it does. It does at the margin make it less likely. I mean, the Fed is fairly determined to get the inflation rate back to 2%. I mean, my kind of personal view is they have a lot less control over the rate of inflation than they like to think they do, especially with interest rates. It's more about the size of money, the size of the money supply, which of course they've increased massively in recent years, absolutely massively. So it's that's kind of where the inflation is coming from. But yes, look, I think it's more likely the cash rate here, and I can't quite remember what it is at the moment, 4.5 or something, stays where it is for longer.
Yeah, and finally, Adam, before I let you go, do you think that all of this is part of the reason why that State of the Union that was, everybody said, oh, look, he got through it, he made it through the speech. Well, only 33% of voters felt the speech positively impacted their view of the president, so he did not get a bump out of that, and still only 37% of Americans believe he's doing a good job as president. Adam, your take. I mean, the State of the Union couldn't save him. Can anything at this point?
Yeah, well, look, it's certainly a very low bar that he managed to actually say all the words properly. But that's kind of where we've got to. He did get a big tick for that. But look, I mean, it's a hyper-partisan campaign speech, I thought, and I'm sure that's what most Americans thought too. I mean, they probably wonder, why is this campaign speech given so much attention, kind of in the Congress, when it could have been given anywhere. I mean, as you know, decades ago, the State of the Union speech was meant to be something that kind of reached across the aisle and actually talked about the serious problems the US faced in a bipartisan manner. But it's certainly not the case anymore. I mean, that speech, was just an attack on Republicans and Donald Trump, basically. And surely most Americans saw that. So I'm not surprised at all that he didn't get a bounce in the polls. And look, I mean, I don't think there is anything that can improve his standing. Americans have made up their mind. It's been 3 years. I don't think all the tens of millions, hundreds of billions that are going to be spent on ads are going to make any difference.
Well, we'll see. We've still got a long 8 months to go. Adam Creighton, thanks for your time, as always, on the U.S. Report.
Thanks, James.